Call this meeting to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, moving on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or?
No, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the consent agenda. I do have a question about the special meeting minutes. Only where it concerns the those present. When I called the meeting to order, it was just myself, John, and Christine present in that meeting. We had to adjourn and then we met up with the others in the executive session. Does that matter? I know it was only an online meeting, a Zoom meeting, and so some of you just showed up to the executive session. You didn't show up to the public
Right,
session.
that was one of those.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it matters.
It's not material, but it is worth noting for accuracy, who had joined in the executive session. And
Okay.
who's not, because, but it's not material since no action was taken.
Okay. But I do want to encourage everyone to show up to the actual call to order, because if we don't have a quorum, I can't call to order. You know what? It's like all of us need to go to that public meeting. Okay, so any other questions in regard to the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And now we have time for public comment. Nobody in the crowd, anybody online? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Let's go to the general manager's report.
It's gonna be a fairly quick report, but I got a bunch of items to cover, so we kind of just tick it off. First, Commissioner Deshmani recognized this. A month ago, our snow pack for the Nooksack watershed was at 38%. As of yesterday, it was at 48%. So still really low, but moving in the right direction strongly. So to have that kind of a catch up in a month means you got normal snow plus some. So that was some good news. That being said, the power markets continue their volatility. So for instance, yesterday, the power markets went up $10 a megawatt hour just yesterday in mid-sea. So it's bouncing all over the place. In absolute terms, it went from $25 to $35 a megawatt hour in the day ahead peak forwards. So specifically that's what happened. But we're seeing moves of up to $200 or $300 a megawatt hour in the market when you have weather events right now. And it's partially because a lot of the dispatchable generation is being taken offline for maintenance prior to the spring runoff. And you're kind of at the mercy of what you can import and export, and then whatever wind is blowing in the Columbia Gorge. So that's causing power prices to bounce all over the place right now. Are there any?
If I may,
Yeah.
so this was a topic at the last WPUDA meetings, and the key takeaway was during the period from January 10th to 20th, particularly the 12th through the 18th, it was really difficult. And voltages dropped in the grid in certain places of the state to just over 100 volts in the final distribution. So that tells you what kind of the chaos that may be happening upstream of that at higher voltages. And so the aspects that also resulted in money impacts. So it affected reliability, but the financial impacts, as Chris pointed out, many people had to buy spot electricity at high prices. And in addition to that, they had to pay transmission charges. Or BPA incurred transmission charges that amounted to over $100 million in a week. And that was for the interchanges in California. And California is very smart. When you use their grid infrastructure, they charge you. And so that really helped motivate the case for the Northwest to partner more aggressively with the Southwest rather than California. And the governor just recently wrote a letter encouraging the Northwest to kind of favor California and wait for analysis to be done in that regard, knowing that the Public Park Committee is trying to favor the Southwest. So it's an interesting, some backstory there.
Any more? Okay. Our next commission meeting, I'll be out of town. Brian will be covering for me, just an FYI. The interviews for the AGM are going to be this week and next. We've got one set up for Friday and one next week we haven't set up yet. The BPA 230 kV, we keep pushing on that. This is the potential sale of some or part of the assets for the former Intalco plant. And it's tied up with, how are we going to get service to the hydrogen electrolyzer, which is going to start at 250 megawatts if they take off the way they plan. So we are pushing. One of the things that BPA has said is that the reason they can't give us an answer is because their contracts are with Intalco. They run another 7 years, and they can't get in the middle of all that. I understand that, so we pushed back with AltaGas because they're assuming everything from Intalco and said, look, you may want to talk to Intalco and the two of you go talk to BPA and free this up so we can start moving this. Beyond that, I don't have an update on what's going on. Any questions on
Well,
that?
just a comment that the county has substantial leverage and importance in the relationship with AltaGas, so it's something to consider.
Yeah, we don't need leverage with them. They're completely on board with this. The issue is how do we get BPA to move off the dime?
Okay.
And that's what we're working on. Moving on to another similar issue, but not quite the same, the service to the jail. The facilities planning is proceeding on that, and they're not going to actually scope the thing until December. So I'll be working with them throughout this year. At some point, we're going to want to come back and get some kind of letter from the county committing so that we can begin spending money and making an investment for the long term. The comp planning process has begun. They interviewed me about a month and a half ago, and in the next round of input, I haven't gone back to John yet, but I will relatively soon. There's a planning piece that we need to put in place for Cherry Point that will feed into the comp plan with regards to both water and power. So that's underway. The planning process, another topic, planning process for Station 1 is underway, and we've kind of scoped some of the problem. It has changed fairly substantially in the last couple of months, and we'll be bringing back more of that to you guys once we've kind of fully scoped the issue and have some recommended paths to pursue. There's a cyber security infrastructure briefing today at 11, so I'll need a hard stop here, and it's put on by I can't remember if it's Homeland Security or DOE, but they invited all of the APPA and AWWA CEOs and GMs to participate, and I signed up for it, and it's at 11 o'clock today. The AI briefing that you requested, we're trying that for the second meeting in March. And so that's the target there. And then the last thing on my list is Karina Hoyer is, I think she's talked to the three of you now. Is that correct?
I talked to her tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew we'd have the whole thing in process. She talked to me last Friday. I think Atul, she was going to talk to you right after she talked to me. Yeah. So that's in process. And then she's going to start talking to members of staff starting today as well. So that's going. But one thing she did ask was if we wanted to have a retreat, she gave us some dates. So if you could open up your calendars, that'd be great. So what worked for her, the earliest ones were in April. There weren't any meeting dates available in March. And her dates in April are April 2nd through the 4th after 1:30. Okay. Or April 15th through the 18th after 1:30.
So 15th through the 18th is going to be better for me just because that first week of April is spring break for kids.
Okay.
Some of us kids.
April 15th to the 18th, you said?
Mhm. That was her second group of dates that were available. She's got 3 afternoons or 4 afternoons there.
I'm gonna look up a wedding.
Yeah, I think that second week, anything is, well, it was in the afternoon.
Mhm.
Anything in the afternoon is open.
Yeah, the only thing, she didn't have Friday afternoon, so Monday through Thursday afternoon that week.
So 18th and 19th would be. a
She's not
problem.
available on the 19th.
I know, I'm just saying that that's
The
when I'll be gone. So
So you'd be looking at the,
15th through the 17th.
So 15th, 16th or 17th?
Yeah, she just needs us one day after 1:30. Is that?
well, what was scoped in her agreement was a single half-day retreat with the commission.
Okay.
And by the way, the thing is configured, it's open-ended enough. If you guys want another one or, follow on work, there's room there.
The 18th is, actually, it's in the morning, so it's fine. Any of those days work.
Okay, so I'll let her know that Monday through Wednesday, the 18th doesn't work for Commissioner Bishmani.
Yeah.
So I'll let her know that Monday through Wednesday of that week and let her pick, and then I will get back to you and we'll work with Ann to get the actual date set up and meeting notice and all the other stuff that goes with that. Okay,
Did we pick a day that we prefer?
But he's gonna get back to us.
Okay,
yeah, what I found is that the first 3 days that
Yeah.
are open for all 3 of you, I'll just ask her for her preference.
yeah, she may have other factors too.
Yeah, I don't know, and
For example, certain staff availability too.
well, I thought this meeting was not staff availability. It was all about the commissioners meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm leaving the details up to,
Why don't you just
Great.
let her know the dates and we'll go from there?
yeah.
Will do.
Yeah. It's evolving.
All right. That's it for my report.
Great, thank you. Moving on to old business, we're gonna start with a broadband update. Is that you, Andrew?
Yes, it is. And rather than an oral report as usual, decided to spice things up with a PowerPoint presentation today.
Nice, okay.
Really, the goal is just to bring everyone up to speed with where we are in the broadband program,
You should be good to
how
go.
we got
Andrew.
here. Sorry?
You should be good to go now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to dive in. You'll see how the presentation intertwines in between, kind of bringing you up to speed with where we are, where we're headed, and again, just where we are today. So, what is broadband? We've talked about this a lot. The state broadband goal being 150 symmetrical by 2028. It's amazing to me to think that DSL was once the definition of broadband, and of course, in 10 years, the definition will change again. But for now, we have a goal that we're trying to hit. Talk a lot about fiber to the premise, and that really stems from the grant funding available to public agencies like the PUD, where it's really tailored to fiber to the premise projects. But in light of BEAD and some other upcoming opportunities, folks are starting to talk a lot more about wireless. So although fiber to the premise is really the gold standard, we are looking at areas that might allow for a fiber to the premise or a hybrid mix of fiber to wireless in light of some upcoming really hard to reach areas in our community that might exceed, for example, $10,000 per home pass.
Is that kind of an emerging number, $10,000 per home pass?
That was the threshold in historical WISBO funding and other funding, as that once you hit 10,000, you're pretty much below the threshold of receiving dollars. And so we don't know what that will be for BEAD funding just yet, because I think we've talked about in previous meetings, we'll have the first round of BEAD funds first, and then that will inform the broadband office of what those high cost areas are and what that dollar amount is. But historically, we know that it's once you hit kind of the $10,000 mark, you're pretty much going to be a low scoring applicant. So what we do, I thought I just kind of, this is not a local photo. This is just a photo I pulled off of the internet to kind of visual, so we can visualize what it is that we are going to be doing in terms of the program as it is today. where we just put in the physical infrastructure, fiber infrastructure in the ground, or we put it on utility poles. And it's called dark fiber because there are no electronics on either end of the fiber. We just put in the infrastructure and we maintain the infrastructure. And then a provider would come along and put equipment, electronics on either end and deliver services and content to the end user. And that's called lit fiber, or lit services, which we talked about before. So this is a picture of directional bore machine. They're throwing in conduit. That's that orange tube there. And then later they'll blow in fiber cable through that. So kind of get you a visual. So hopefully we'll get one of these pictures that's local to Whatcom County here soon as our project develops. And so the issue, the commissioners, wonderful job identifying the issue and then taking action many years ago. And since then, we've been tracking the development of unserved locations and underserved locations in our community. And what we know is that there's still nearly 13,000 unserved locations in our community. And typically they're spread out and low population. And what's interesting to me is that we have 5 different companies in our county competing for services. And the question I have is, well, if we have so many internet service providers, why do we still have so many unserved locations? And what we found is that it's
Can we go back to that slide?
sure.
So, we're looking at the bottom row, right? When you talk about unserved.
Correct.
So, you said 13,000. I didn't see that where that number is.
Between the underserved and unserved, including both of those combined.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And the percentages change. Is that in the last 2 columns that you're talking about?
The percentage change is just, that's,
Well, it's from June 22 down.
Oh, it's over the year. So it's from June 22 to June 23.
Yeah, and the reason these dates were picked by Andrew is because these line up with data cleanup dates for the fabric. So it was first published in mid 22, and then there were 2 updates. Has there been a 4th update yet?
yes, there's a December 20.
Yeah, we just haven't done the analysis on it, but so you'll see there, the number of fiber connections has declined sharply, which is counter to, you think, why is that?
Yeah.
Well, it's data cleaning.
Okay.
There were a whole bunch of places that were shown as served by fiber that weren't served at all. And the ISPs who initially made that input have gone through and cleaned it up. And so what you're seeing now is probably a more accurate number than what we started with. So
Is
this
this-
gives you an idea of how it's bounced around.
Is this chart going to be available to us?
Sure.
So I'd like to, I don't, if you want to put it on the website, that's fine. I just like to know how it's going to be available, or email it to us.
I would recommend just put it on the website, and then it's available for anybody that wants to look at it.
Yeah, because I don't want to tie up the conversation, but I want to look at why underserved went down and why unserved went up. That's a really interesting thing to me.
Sure, we can talk more.
At least on that point, do you have any thoughts?
From my seat, I think it is data cleanup over the years. I really do think that that's what it is. And there's been some challenge processes that have gone into play, and there's FCC every 2 weeks updates the fabric data actually with all the most recent challenges that have been coming in. So, but then there's the every 6-month major deployment of the updated fabric, but they are updating the data every couple of weeks with challenge data as it rolls in. So
And just to confirm the definition of underserved, because it's not on the chart, is people who have service, but it's not 150 symmetric. Is that correct?
It's below, it's 25.3 and below.
Oh,
25 down, 3 up and below is
Yes.
underserved.
or below. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the 150.
Actually,
underserved is 100 down, 20 up, or below.
is less than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay, less than
if it's-
100.
If it's 25.3, it's underserved. If it's below 25.3, they calculate it as unserved.
Right. So, yeah,
And so one thing that I know, and Andrew's looked at a couple of specific locations, we know there's people out there who they do a speed test and then they challenge the fabric data and they say, hey, the ISP says I'm served at gig symmetric. In reality, here's what my speed test shows. And so they, get that challenged and it gets changed in the FCC data. And then the ISP looks at it and goes, well, the only reason that particular customer is underserved is because they've refused to take fiber service from us that runs right in front of their house. And so from a FCC perspective, NTIA perspective, and a WISPO perspective, they're served. Because they've got a fiber pass in front of their house, they choose not to pay for the service, that's their choice.
Before you upload the chart, could you make sure to put those numbers on there, just so that people who
Sure.
look at it from the public and know what they're looking at for what's unserved and what's underserved?
Well, we'll go ahead and put the whole thing up there. I think it was on an earlier slide.
was?
Showed
Okay.
where the
Okay.
underserved was.
Okay.
Just so the issue and we have lots of internet service providers in our community, and it's really nobody's fault that we have these unserved and underserved locations. It's just that the private sector has a higher and better use of their capital in a more competitive market. And so, like I mentioned, the commission put together some policy goals that we've been clicking through over the last year and a half or so to reach those policy goals. But it's important to kind of stop for a minute and say although it might seem like it's just a 1 or 2 person show, it's really not. It is a team effort here. We have our PUD Port County Steering Committee. We continue to meet weekly. And I threw the City of Bellingham logo on there as well, just because we've been in conversations with them about ways we could utilize their existing infrastructure without the need for new infrastructure. Should we need to get down to the C Street location in downtown Bellingham, for example, and they've been open to exploring that further. And at the state level, we've already worked and engaged with NOAANET and Petricor in the past, and they have lots of programs that help with planning and many other details related to broadband. And the State Association of Counties, they're developing a coalition of resources that we may want to tap into in preparation for BEAD funding as well. So there's a lot of activity happening and resources that are becoming available at the state level. And of course, I've totally probably talked about the Shelby Coalition way too much, but they're a great resource for us. And it's just fun to see how some of these federal programs can trickle down to the state level and how it impacts us at the local level. So great membership there to keep us abreast of what's going on. So parts of the internet, we probably all know this, but just to kind of recap, the big long haul route, when we get on the internet here in Whatcom County, we've got to get connected to somewhere. And that data goes back to, well, there's many, but to kind of keep it simple, it really comes back to the Westin in Seattle or north to the Harbor Center in Canada. And there's exit ramps, if you will, in communities off of this long haul. One's, of course, in Mount Vernon, and then again in the city of Bellingham. And that's where you pick up middle mile infrastructure. And I think it was, oh, go ahead.
Can I ask just a nerdy what the long haul, what does that look like physically? Is it attached to transmission lines, or is it underground, or
Yes.
both? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But
Yeah,
I mean, this is like there's a lot of fiber,
Well,
right?
it's more than one line.
Right.
First of all, going in and out of the
Okay.
Westin building are hundreds of
Okay.
various feeds. Some of them are trans-Pacific. Some
Okay,
of them run down to San Francisco. I mean, there's a huge number of Westin building is a terminus for a lot of the internet on the West Coast.
okay,
So it's, but typically you're talking about fiber. We're
Yeah.
not talking about copper. Although I suppose there's some legacy copper somewhere in the whole long haul, but basically it's fiber. And much of it is underground. Of course, the subsea cable is, I'm not gonna say underground, but it's cable that's laid on the ocean floor.
mhm,
And its number one exposure is anchor dragging.
mhm.
But they try and put it in places where that's not gonna be a risk.
All right, thank you for
yeah.
indulging my curiosity about I'm always just interested in what it actually looks like.
Yeah, this is an incredibly simplified diagram.
Mhm.
It- Literally hundreds of lines going into the Westin building.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for the middle mile, many years ago, I think probably starting in 2015, you started seeing studies coming out for middle mile projects, and then following with construction dollars from the broadband office and the Community Economic Revitalization Board. That took us to about 2019, at the end of 2019, with this big push from the state office with more middle mile funding. And of course, the pandemic hit and the game completely changed to last mile infrastructure and funding for last mile. So naturally, the next question is, well, where's all the funding that's come into our community? And there wasn't really a tool that was created yet that kind of identified all the funding that's come into communities. And so this is just a quick snapshot. I didn't color coordinate them by different organization or anything like that. Just made them all green. And this is all the funding that's come into the community. You can see that long haul route that we were just talking about in purple, that linear route coming into the city of Bellingham there.
Sorry
Go ahead.
to interject again, but this is such a cool map. I know we don't get a lot of traffic to our website, but I wonder if this is something we could put on our Facebook page and just say, hey, I mean, because you have put so much great information on the broadband program on our website. And if we're gonna post this PowerPoint too, I just think this is really neat for people to see how much funding is coming in for in different ways. So
Sure.
anyways, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
And you can see the Port of Bellingham's routes, which I think we've shown before. Those are the linear routes. They're not the polygons. And then you can see the kind of the funding out there in Point Roberts. And then that red line there is the Whippy Tail middle mile project that they were just funded. So they already have middle mile out to Point Roberts and an existing co-location facility, but this is their new route that connects down to Whidbey Island. So we took this map to the steering committee and we said, okay, where can we divide and conquer in our community? Where does the port want to really start zeroing or dialing in on upcoming funding, and where can the PUD start with helping really? And the team kind of landed on, well, the port really wants to do an infill of their current projects and connect their middle mile together, and then in that same process, pick up more unserved locations out in those areas. And it was natural that we would then look at kind of the eastern part of the community, which will most likely be the hardest to reach and most expensive.
So to be clear, that blue highlighted area there is our target. That's the PUD target.
Yeah, thanks. And that will change. We're looking at some federal funding opportunities right now, and without getting too crazy in the weeds with all the data, that you kind of start forming polygons around the funding agencies' layers and what they're looking at and what they will score high. So this is really geared towards everything other than BEAD funding for now. When it gets to, so like you talked about possibly some USDA funding, maybe CURB funding coming up, PWB, should they allow for grants, 100% grants. But when it comes to BEAD funding, the state actually creates your project areas for you. And they identify boundaries of roughly 1,000 unserved locations. And then what they'll want to see is, we'll just pick on that orange blob there, and they'll want to see an application go in for that polygon area. And then of course there could be private providers who also bid on that same orange area, and that gives the broadband office an apples to apple comparison of applications.
So one thing that I want to make absolutely clear here, let's take the dark blue area as an example. Much of that is going to be low density, high cost per pass. And we know that just from the area that it is. Similarly, the area that's off to the far right, that's orange, the light orange, that's going to be very low density, very high cost per pass. The BEAD office recognizes that, and they said, well, gosh, there may be some areas where a hybrid solution might make sense, where you run fiber to a certain point and then do wireless beyond that to serve. And that could reduce your cost per pass for the whole project. That's nice. But what they haven't done is said, and here's that number where you go over $5,000 per pass or 10,000 or 15. They haven't picked a number. And so what you're left with is if you put a home run fiber project in and they decide, well, gosh, that's too expensive, we're going to go with a hybrid. You aren't in the running unless you have also a hybrid offer already in for that area. And it's a dilemma. And if on the other hand, you say, okay, I'm going to make a hybrid offer, and then they decide, well, even though it's $25,000 a pass, we want home run fiber. And they make that decision, then you're not in unless you also have a home run fiber project submitted. So in those areas, them not telling us what the target is for the cost per pass means that if we want to compete in those areas, really, we're probably going to have 2 submissions. And it's not even clear to me that that's allowed at this point.
When you say per pass,
Yes.
do you mean per customer? Like, what are you talking about? per
So when you put your infrastructure by the building, whether or not you connect to that building,
Mhm.
that's called a pass.
Okay,
So typically what'll happen is in these remote areas, you'll have a 60 to 80% take rate of your per pass.
Mhm.
So 60 to 80% of the properties that you go by will say, hey, I want service. And some will not. For a variety of reasons.
So which is crazy because it could be up to $5,000 per pass.
Mhm.
But then only 60 to 70% of those people will even take advantage of
60
the
to 80,
infrastructure.
yeah.
So when you think about the cost per home served,
It's higher.
it's even higher.
oh, hi.
Right.
I mean, that's a
Mhm.
large area, fewer
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you've got 50 people out at the end and you're running fiber
Sure.
out there, you're gonna go by a lot of residences anyway.
Mhm.
And you hope they all choose to select it, but many folks live out in that area because they don't want communication with the rest of the world. And, you gotta be careful when you go on their property and knock on their door and say, hey, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That's, yeah, that's
You do it.
yeah, exactly. And you'll see an order for flak vests and stuff a little later.
Nice. So are these colored areas the draft lead project areas for our county?
Correct.
Okay.
These were included in the volume 2 initial proposal. And there was a link to the software program where you can download the project areas that the state was looking to consider. Or preliminary project areas, to your point. And
So-
then the volume 2 final that was submitted to NTIA, they removed that link. So we were able to capture that ahead of time. The process now is the state broadband office will perhaps revise this, and they will be sending us a file that will be used. So there'll be a clear documentation of, this is the accurate boundaries that was provided directly from the broadband office. So this was the draft version.
We might be covering it later in the presentation, but are you going to talk about how we're going to cover these project areas?
These particular project
Yeah.
areas, not in this presentation.
Do we have any thoughts about that yet?
Well, I have a thought that
Mhm.
I gotta put out there really quick. We're spending a lot more time on this than was allocated for our timeline
Sure,
here.
sure.
So if we need to dig into something like this a lot deeper, which we may, I would suggest that we do a study session. Because we do have a
Yeah,
time
there's plenty
limit.
of time.
Yeah.
I have a few more questions too. Maybe, can we revisit some of this at our next broadband update too? Or maybe talk about BEAD again? I mean, we're gonna talk about BEAD again, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were trying to do here was put everything in context, because
Okay.
then today
Good.
we're asking you to
All right, okay.
approve an MSA and some service order documents that fit into the whole
Okay,
approach.
Okay.
We can skip through some of this. We started putting together just, tracking expenses, things like that, trying to look at a goal of someday being a self-sustaining model where, our revenues cover our expenses, things like that. But we don't need to go through that any further, but because I can just say that and you get what we're trying to do. So then the question becomes, what about the customer connection process? That's where we're going to see the master services agreement and the service order summary. Thanks to John Sitkin and his team for helping out with the master services agreement. But basically, the master services agreement is a legal framework that allows the public agency, the PUD, to lease on a wholesale basis our dark fiber strands to a private entity, such as Would-be-Tel. And the service order summary is, well, let's say Would-be-Tel markets and solicits their services to 100 locations out there in Point Roberts. They all say, yes, we want your service, Would-be-Tel. Would-be-Tel turns around and provides us with all the addresses that they are wanting to be connected to. That hits the service order summary, which is an Excel sheet, an ongoing database of of those 100 addresses. And that then we use to calculate the monthly fee for leasing of the wholesale dark fiber strands. And negotiations up to this point, or modeling, I should say, we've arrived at $20 per home pass, and providers are okay with that dollar amount today. So that could change, but that's what we're modeling today. So that's the master service order summary and the and the service order summary, excuse me, master services agreement and the service order summary. You'll see that under new business. I believe it's item C. And that's it.
We do have lots of questions, I'm sure.
Okay.
Like you suggested, Sarah, that we can follow up later.
Yeah, okay.
There's plenty to talk about.
Yeah, let me work with Ann and get a study session on the calendar.
Mhm.
And then we can just talk about broadband outside of our normal meetings, because there's a lot to talk about.
And I
There's
would,
a lot.
yeah, and I would really appreciate a study session because I have a lot of questions that,
Well, we can set a couple hours aside. It'll be an open meeting, so we don't
Yeah.
have to worry about it. If we get done early, it's fine.
yeah,
But
yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Anything else on the broadband update though?
I think we're okay.
Okay,
That's it.
all right,
Yep,
then
thanks.
let's.
We'd love to talk to you for
Yeah,
hours.
well,
And
yeah, I
we're
know.
gonna do we're approving this under new
New
business,
business,
right?
yeah.
So if we have some specific questions about
The MSA.
we'll do that then.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you, Andrew. Moving on to adjudication.
Thank you,
John?
commissioners. Sure. Both bills that we've been tracking have made it through the capital budget or the capital cutoff. We expect both to pass. There was a flurry last week with a proposal from the Colville Nation on changes to the bill on water right commissioners generally. We had agreement with the Lummi on proposed changes, and Lummi and others, I should say. And the Colvilles came in and wanted to put some additional requirements on qualifications for a water rights commissioner. I don't think those are going forward. We did not comment on those, but I did not think they were good for an adjudication process. We typically don't put requirements, substantive knowledge requirements on a commissioner generally. So that's all going forward. The local bar committee has been meeting. I have heard some concerns from some of the members reached out to me rather than the AOC, and I am going to speak with Shannon Hinchcliffe with the AOC this afternoon to talk about the committee. The committee meets once every 3 to 4 weeks, 6 set-up meetings. In theory, are going to work on rules for the adjudication, but there really isn't time to get into the depth of the rules that would be required, and it's perceived to be an advisor committee at best, and or a token that we've done outreach committee claimed by the agency. So I'm going to have that discussion with Shannon Hinchcliffe this afternoon, and I'll have a little bit more in executive session, but that's the sum of the report. If you have any questions.
Questions? No? Thank you, John.
I will be
you know-
discussing with you. I'll just say, there was a letter from, this is public, there was a letter from a group of lawyers representing ag communities and others. None of them local attorneys who had extensive comments on the claim forms. We decided we would not join that letter in particular. And I'll discuss it with you later.
Is that letter available for us to look at?
I can send it to you, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
I will do
John,
that.
does that sum up the legislative update also, or do
No.
you have something else? Okay.
There may be
got-
other.
Okay.
So there was some legislation that was supported by WPUDA, among many others, to make some legislative changes to the Foster decision. And I believe that even though it's minor tinkering, but I believe that has survived and should be voted out. I think it's in the Senate today. And they should maybe, I mean, I'd hate to say, oh yeah, it's a done deal, and then it's not, but we're still tracking that. And then along with the geothermal update, there are two pieces of legislation. One is budget proviso, which budget proviso to do a study. And it was in the Senate operations budget and the House capital budget. And when I look at it, money to do a study should be operational. It's an expense. It's not a capital item, but the Senate didn't see it that way. So that's moving forward now, but it's through the House capital appropriation. And I believe as of yesterday, it was still alive and moving forward. And the same with our geothermal grant bill. Now, the geothermal grant bill, I think will survive the whole thing, but it's contingent on the initiative process that's gonna roll back the CCA failing. So if it doesn't, if the initiative succeeds and CCA is killed, then this bill would die. Which to me is kind of ironic, because there was $2 billion sitting there to be allocated for stuff like this. I'm kind of not getting
the
where
money
that's
go?
gonna go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but that's, that's how you make legislation. It's in the sausage.
When you say the bill would die, the bill, does it have explicit language in it that says this bill will only be enforced after the outcome of the November election? Is that the way?
It
it's worded?
specifically is worded that it's contingent on failure of the initiative in the November election. Last I saw, and it keeps being revised. There's a whole bunch of language revisions that have been proposed by various folks, and it's kind of bubbled around for the last 2 weeks.
That was the last I was aware too, that it was contingent.
But it did pass out of the House Capital Budget Committee yesterday.
Oh, good, okay.
So I think it'll go to a floor vote soon.
Mhm.
And it passed unanimously out of the Senate. I can't imagine something passing unanimously out of the Senate, not passing in the House.
Right.
Yeah, it was 49-0 out of the Senate.
Yeah.
So, that's it for the legislative update, unless people have more
Great.
questions.
No,
There's
good.
lots we can talk about, I'm sure. And then on the geothermal update, you've heard the legislative side of that. We're gonna have a meeting with members of the governor's staff, the governor, and the NUCSAC up at the NUCSAC Community Center on Friday. And Andrew, Commissioner Grant, and I will be there representing the PUD. And then, of course, the NUCSAC tribal leaders will be there, and it should be a wonderful little event,
Are you gonna get, is the governor gonna come still? Or?
as far as we know. Yeah, he's supposed to be in Bellingham for something else. And,
Yeah.
and his staff reached out to Commissioner Grant and said, hey, we've heard lots of stuff about this. Can we meet with you guys about the geothermal? And the NUCSAC were really gracious and offered to host, and, and here we are.
We engaged the governor's staff back in September when we did,
Yep.
so it goes to the good return on investment from outreach.
Mhm.
And Councilmember Kaylee Galloway is coming too, who's, I'd say, the biggest champion for this project on the county council. So I think it'll be a good.
It should be a really nice event.
Great. Anything else with geothermal?
Andrew? No?
No.
Okay.
And now we're gonna go to the per diem compensation policy update.
Well, and this is, sure, I'll jump onto this, Chris, if that's all right. This
Yep.
is less of an update and an opportunity, to review the per diem policy and where the commission really wants to go with this, if it's working, if it's not working, if you want a different method. And I try to outline the questions and issues for you in the action memo. In short, the state statute requires that any per diems must be for actions for the benefit of the district. Recent history, the general manager was reluctant to determine what the benefit of the district was in reviewing a commissioner's request for per diem, feeling that could put him at odds with a commissioner, which was not what he wanted. And so the commission is the entity that decides what's for the benefit of the commission. So we structured a process trying to balance the different interests of the former commission of a number of years ago that, well, the commission didn't want to opine, one commissioner didn't want to opine on what another commissioner was doing. Some commissioners were comfortable with reviewing per diem requests. So we set up a system that pre-approved certain requests, like a meeting, like a WPUDA meeting, that if something came up with that you did not anticipate, that wasn't on the list, you would bring it up at the next commission meeting, disclose it. And if a commissioners didn't have objection, it would be deemed approved. And that's been operating. There were some timing and process issues. So the commission in this policy passed a deadline for when the request had to come in. And then there are structural aspects of the form. So Anne, in large part, developed a form that we've included in the packet for you to review. If that works for you, that you would submit that with any of what the request would be. Again, you don't have to use this process that you've been using. You could come up with a different one. You could go back to say, you know what, if a commissioner submits it, we're going to trust each commissioner and let that be their determination. You could have a process where the commission reviews all per diems that come in and approve all of them in whole, or we can continue with the current process. The one thing I'd let you know is that state law sets a per diem limit and then on a per diem request, and there's an annual limit that comes about as adjusted for inflation. So a commissioner could, in theory, use all their allowed per diem in the first 6 or 9 months of a year and not have any per diem available or reimbursement for the last quarter of a year, for instance. So I hope that introduction helps, but it's open for the commission for discussion of how you want to proceed with per diems. And or Chris, is there another issue that I'm missing from the management perspective or accounting perspective?
No, it's, it's the commission's per diems, and we, as staff, we will do whatever you guys want. And the issue's been, we haven't been able to get specific enough to say, okay, that is exactly what the commission wants, and that's what we're trying to do today, is just get more guidance from you on what you want.
I think the way that we've been doing it has been fine. I think adding this upcoming per diem request aspect of our commissioner reports has, I think, allowed us all to communicate openly about what we're doing. I don't think that submitting a form beforehand and then filling out a form later, I don't think we need to add that step, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it would make, I'm thinking about staff though. And I'm wondering if part of the reason for that form is it would make it easier for Chris.
Well, no, actually, the form was at the request, and I don't remember which commissioner, in one of our commission meetings, we were talking about this. And one of you suggested, well, how about having a form up front so we can fill it out, and then that goes and helps the discussion on what's allowable. That's why the form was created. That literally, that wasn't something that we dreamed up, and it was a request that was made, and we're trying to accommodate the request.
I think we already have, frankly, a lot more formality around per diem than I kind of looked into, like, what does the Port of Bellingham do? What do a few other PUDs do? And we have way more structure right now than
You do.
with the Port of Bellingham, for example.
Or and most other PUDs.
Pretty much every other PUD. So
I agree that, we do have structure. I do know what's on the list, and then, I go over that anyway. There have been times though, when I'm a little hesitant to agree to per diem requests, because I don't know that it's for the benefit of the commission or for the benefit of the organization, or if it's like just an educational piece. Like, we all do a lot of like reading and, educating ourselves, and we should do that. That's our job, right? And we get a base salary for that. But I sort of feel like it should be defined, and this is just my opinion, that if a commissioner is not representing the PUD or has not been asked by the PUD to attend something, that I'm not sure it's for the benefit of the PUD. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, there have been times where I'm like, yeah, gosh, that sounds great. You should definitely do this thing. And then been like, but is that for the benefit of the whole? And then I always expect when it's outside of the list that we have, and somebody's doing this extra like piece, and they're claiming a per diem for that they would come back and share that that educational piece with people. I feel like, we all say, oh, this is more structure than any other thing, but I sort of feel like, when you're talking about, $168 of public money, that it's not formal enough when it's not included on the list, when it's just like, oh yeah, I went to this, thing, and I'm going to take $168 for that. That feels strange to me. And it doesn't feel like the money's being followed as well as it could be.
well, so we already have the list of events,
Which is
of
fabulous. Yeah.
committees that we're all a part of.
Mhm.
And so there's the default, kind of sort of per diems. They're on the pre-approved list. And then the things that are not on the pre-approved list. We're doing discussion, we're having this upcoming per diem request
Mhm.
discussion. So is that where you feel like it's hard in that upcoming per diem request conversation?
But that
Yeah.
would be a challenge, like whether we have a form or not.
Right,
Yeah.
you're right, it would
Yeah.
be, but at least it would be something that's tracked as like, this is outside of the norm and this is why. I feel like it's valuable.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to learn, we have to be better about being honest with each
Yeah,
other, you know, build
maybe.
our relationship to the point and. hopefully the
Yeah.
country will help with that.
Well, and I mean, I am trustworthy of my, fellow commissioners.
No, but we should be able to give each other feedback,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
That's
be,
healthy.
and be transparent with the public about where that money's going.
and we
because-
shouldn't put that on poor Chris, should not.
Right,
He's not the ombudsman of this.
I'm okay with that. It's
Yeah.
just, I'll do what you guys want.
Yeah.
And that's,
But it's not fair to you for you to be figuring out what we think is reasonable. That's our job, right? So.
and it almost feels strange to me that you sign off on that. I mean, I know that you probably have to for budgetary reasons, I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
well, to cut the
Um,
check.
Yeah,
I
to
mean, I've
cut the
got to
check,
sign off.
but it's like, you're not the one approving that, and I think it even says approved by. And you're not approving.
What I actually think would be way more useful to me than the form beforehand. Is to see the per diem form that you all submit, cause we see it on the payroll, like the number of.
Yes, yeah.
But then I'm like, oh, I don't know what those 10 meetings were,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
what, cause we already fill out a form that says where we
Yeah.
went. Why we went there and the business purpose for the PUD,
Oh,
and I
listen,
actually
listen.
like,
Yeah.
What if when we submit, it automatically gets sent to the other two?
yeah, I think that would be a great form of transparency to have in terms of. Self-policing each other, I hate to use that
I
term,
know.
but that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
And then we just continue what we're doing right now. And then it's really no extra work for the staff other than making those other forms available to us.
So I would just suggest to the commissioners, that's fine, we can do that.
Yeah.
Great idea.
The issue will be that, a lot of times the forms will come in on the deadline.
Mhm.
And so, what we would want to do is, I would deem everything authorized and go ahead and
Yeah.
process it. And you guys would get the forms and then you could discuss it at the following meeting.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think.
I would like that too, especially because it gives me the opportunity to be like, oh, you attended this conference that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
What did you learn? Right? Like what? And so then it actually is benefiting the PUD instead of just the individual commissioner that attended something and was
And
educated.
yeah, I don't think this isn't about one particular event. It's about helping each other be responsive to each other.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like if like any one of us attends and then, well, maybe we'll get the feedback. It's okay next time. That's something that we might do differently.
Yeah.
So it's a process of ongoing improvement and checks and balances. And I really like this idea of the other two commissioners getting our forms. So. Is that,
Well,
I
let me-
assume, since now we're all doing it electronic, I think I was the only one doing it hard copy last
Were
year.
you?
Yeah, but I'm doing it electronically now too, so it should be very easy to just forward those to each other.
How does that sound, John?
Well, that sounds fine. A couple things I was going to bring up. One, again, the per diem is for attendance at official meetings or in the performance of official services or duties on behalf of the district. And we take a broad interpretation of that. You're a commissioner, there could be a lot of different duties that could fall under that. Per diem is not paid for ministerial or services of ministerial or professional nature. And you are paid a compensation. So I think, my take would be reading the packet to get ready is not necessarily, arguably is not a per diem, but it could be, but you're paid a salary. I think we try to use a process where there's a lot of meetings that come up and sometimes things come up that you aren't anticipated, that you're the designated broadband person for the sake, or geothermal or water or whatever it is. And something comes up that you need to attend that may not be on the predetermined list, and you would do that. And that would be something appropriate for reimbursement. My only process concern would be timing. And we've had some timing provisions that if the commissioner doesn't get the forms in by the certain deadline, that they're not available for the commission for reimbursement. And that'd be the one area I'd remind the commission that could put commissioners and staff at issue, but that's a policy the commission adopts. And so if it's not complied with, I think the commission would follow the policy. The staff would follow the policy the commission adopted. So if you're late with your form, you may miss your per diem.
That seems fair to me.
I think that seems fair to me. I
Yeah.
think it's like anything, like sometimes if. You know, like the receipt you had, or like if you're, you know, unable to move and you're hospitalized, like, you know, you shouldn't miss like 6 per diems because you were having a major family or health emergency. Like, we're all humans, let's treat each other like humans.
Yeah, we can
Let's
adjust.
treat each other with respect,
Yeah.
let's assume the best.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that, I feel like we've spent a lot of time on this per diem policy, over the years. I feel like I would be comfortable kind of continuing with what we have right now, with the addition of making the forms that we submit where we're already writing the business purpose available to each of us so that we see what the staff are seeing.
Yeah.
Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah.
Sorry to take.
No, that's good.
Can
Yeah,
I,
good.
just one observation?
Yeah.
Because something that you said really kind of rang a bell
Yeah.
with me. So the 7.5 years that I worked for Snohomish, they had 3 commissioners. We never, not even once, talked about per diems at any of the commission meetings, and I attended them all.
Isn't it?
And, but that was an $800 million a year outfit.
Sure.
And you're talking about, it was decimal dust. You could not see if everybody maxed out, it didn't register. Here at $23 million a year for total revenue, the per diems are about 0.1% of our entire revenue. So it's measurable. It's not a rounding error. It's not decimal dust. Although it doesn't sound like a lot, that's kind of the magnitude that we chase after, trying to make sure the cost. So if you're looking at, why would we be worried about this stuff and nobody else would? We're sensitive to smaller levels of expenditures than much larger organizations. And that's appropriate. And when you look at the stuff we sign off on every other week, every month, stuff I sign every day. These are very small expenditures compared to what are done in other utilities, but they're big for us.
Mhm.
I agree. I also think, like, I've spoken to a lot of other commissioners at WAPUDA meetings, and some of them are very liberal with their per diem requests. They're like, if I did this thing, per diem. And I'm always just super aware of, like, that's also public money,
Ratepayer money,
and I feel like we're fairly generously paid for the work that we do here. So yeah.
I think this is a very productive conversation, and glad you guys brought it up, and I'm glad we brought it to you.
Excellent. So let's move on to new business.
So the first thing is, I'd like to call on Kurt, I believe, who's going to be talking to us about the Station D line stop project.
Morning, Commissioners. Good morning, John.
All right, thank you.
So, Commissioners, I'm here to request a change order for P&P for the D Station line stop project. As you know, D Station is a main delivery point of industrial water for the BP refinery. And we are in process of basically rebuilding the whole D Station. And these are some of the even though the dollar figures may seem large, these are part of the preparatory work to rebuild the D Station. And what we're trying to do is we need to install a line stop in the 24-inch line to essentially turn off the water, and we can install some valving so then we can do the main D Station project. What we found when we were tearing up the ground and getting into the work is that, as this was a 50-year ago or maybe more installation, we're finding that the drawings were not particularly accurate, and we were expecting ductile iron to where we would install this line stop, but we actually ended up with which is common for a lot of our line, the RCCP, which is the reinforced concrete cylinder pipe, which is a very challenging pipe to work with. You've got an interior concrete and a shell steel with a wire wrap, and then another layer of concrete. And so that's kind of where what we found with the change is that, and there's change in request, is the additional work to put the line stop in the RCCP. And as working also with BP, they requested a bypass line as well in case, because what we'd have to do is turn off their water and they only have a couple of hours. So this bypass gives them, instead of about a 4-hour window, gives us about a 6 to 8 hour window. And so I'm here to request an additional funding for a change order to continue to do this work. Any questions?
When were the original design drawings done?
In the 1960s, early 70s, I believe.
Yeah, we stopped using that kind of pipe as new pipe right about then. The
Okay.
industry got smarter.
Okay. I don't have any questions. I'll make a motion to approve change order number 1 for the D Station line stop project.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, commissioners. And Kurt, I think you have the next one as well.
Yes. And the next one is for a rebuild of a intake pump at plant 1. This is requesting for FlowServe to not rebuild, to build and install the intake pump number 1. And this is kind of almost in a sense a maintenance project. These are just, we have 6 pumps over there and they wear out with use, of course. And so this is to redo pump number 1.
I'll make a motion. Or do you have any?
Yeah, just a quick,
Oh, yeah.
so
Mhm.
obviously the pump that's replaced, we rebuild that too. It's a constant substitution, right? So the parts, we retain ownership of the parts and all of that and then send it to refurbishing and rebuilding as well. So it's on the shelf. Or-
No, they basically the impellers wear out in the sense that we are at that point, we're just bringing the water directly from the river. And so even though a lot of the sediment is settling out, we're still picking up, sand and other stuff, and it actually grinds down the impellers, and they're not usable again.
So, are we doing like an analysis, because you've made the comment, Brian's made the comment, that we have more sediment in our intakes. It increases our loading as it relates to chemicals, but it's probably also causing pump degradation faster too. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I mean, anything that's not pure water is going to degrade the pumps. So the more sedimentation you've got, the more abrasion you have of the impellers. That's a fair statement, but there's no kind of way around that given the.
But is this also another aspect where changing river conditions are making operations and maintenance more expensive? Is what I'm curious about.
They could. We haven't done some analysis to see if, like over the last 30 or 40 years, that sedimentation rates have changed with climate change. We have not done that analysis.
Is this something worth doing?
I have to think about that.
Yeah, just something to think about.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, even if it's twice as bad, what that means is your maintenance cycles have to increase somewhat. But you still got to do it. So I got to think about that.
Yeah, okay.
But it doesn't change this action though.
It doesn't.
No.
Yeah, okay.
And this was one of the pumps that was identified in our study as, it was essentially red flag.
Yeah.
As it's a critical, we got to get this done. Yeah.
And I did just receive a message that pump is actually 26 years old. So that's been spinning for the last 25 years plus. So that's pretty good lifespan, I'd say.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So did I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to award the contract to FlowServe for water treatment plant 1 intake pump.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Atul seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners. The last thing
Thank
we
you,
have on
commissioners.
Thank you.
is the MSA and service order forms that Andrew promised. So I don't know, do we have anything else you want to say, or any questions you guys have got?
Question, didn't you have a question?
Well, you and I emailed about this with, like, a bunch of the exhibits weren't in there yet because they're not, we don't have enough information for this. So after we approve this today, when will we get those exhibits?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, we have to have them
Yeah.
before we lease.
Right,
So,
okay,
we can't lease until we get those.
Right.
So that's kind of the back end. The front end is, we're not gonna be able to put the pricing together for them until we find out what the actual costs of the installed system are.
okay,
And so we're working through engineering right now, and then that'll lead to make-ready work, which will lead to construction. And by the time we have the construction, at least advertised and maybe begun, then we'll have a better idea of how close that $20 planning number is to reality.
okay.
So late this year? Something like late
And
this
then
year.
will it come back to the commission for approval then?
Oh,
So why are we approving this right now? Why not just wait until then?
Well, we could, but this is, Andrew kind of knocking stuff out early
okay.
so that it's not a hang up later.
Okay,
So
okay,
that he's worked with John extensively on all of this. And, this also is kind of the codification that at the end of the day, it's still a public asset that we're leasing out. It does not ever revert to the private sector.
Mhm.
That's all captured in here.
okay.
So things that make us different than the port are in these agreements.
So basically, you're just wanting us to approve the structure of this lease agreement. And then you're gonna hang some more details on it before we get signatures, and we're gonna be involved at that step too.
Yep, and
Okay.
we can have a good discussion about this in the broadband study session.
great, let's do that.
I think what you'll see is that come forward is we have a proposed lease agreement based upon the commission approved form and service order. The details are in the attached here. We'll submit a lease agreement and service order with Acme Fiber for your approval.
Okay. I'm
So
ready.
we don't have
make-
to hash the form every time.
Okay,
It also, I'll just say, sorry to keep going, it also gives us a little bit of leverage as we meet with these parties.
uh-huh,
Yeah,
They
that's what I
want
was-
to, they want to tweak some language. We say,
Sure.
this has already
Yeah.
been approved by the commission. You don't
Yeah,
want us
I
to
get
go
it.
back
You don't
on
wanna-
this.
yeah, and you have no idea how
Oh
long
my
that
God,
will
it could take years and thousands of lives.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the master optical fiber and related telecommunications facilities lease agreement. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Do
I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, John and Andrew.
Thank you, everyone. We will move on to the operations report.
Good morning, Commissioners, John.
Good morning, Brian.
Since the last commission meeting, I'd say for day-to-day operations, both electric utility and water utility, it's been business as usual. The weather, river conditions haven't thrown us any curves. The one thing that I'll note that's kind of cool is last week, staff had arranged with the company that does the drone flyovers of in particular, our electric facilities. That company has purchased an underwater drone. And we did some testing at the intake at Water Plant 2 last week. And our interest in the underwater drone was to get a better sense of what's going on with the intake screens, because it's very difficult. We don't have any real-time information on whether or not the screens in wintertime are getting covered by frazzle ice, or during high turbidity conditions are getting covered. And so it was testing of that drone, and what came out of that first test was that the clarity of the video in the river was exceptionally good. And so it could be a tool for us to use. The downside, and what the drone operators will have to work on, is that this particular drone, which is, I'd call it a small version of a deep sea capsule that's tethered to the surface. The problem they had is that at the time that they did the test, the river level was up a little bit, so the current was strong, and they couldn't position and hold steady that drone right in front of the screen. So that's something that they're going to have to work on. But it was kind of cool. We'll see how useful it is for us going forward. jumping away from water operations, the one thing I wanted to bring up is something we've discussed before, but we're planning on demoing the Bender Park Communications Tower this summer. Based on recent conversation with AT&T, who we were going to require to take their equipment off that tower before we demo it, they have not completed securing the new site for their tower to migrate the equipment onto. And in fact, they're still in permitting with the city of Ferndale. And so the latest timeline they gave me was they wouldn't even have the permitting done until the end of the third quarter of this year. And it was sort of indeterminate how soon they'd be able to construct the tower and migrate their equipment. So it's setting up a situation where we've already told AT&T they need to be off our tower by the end of the second quarter of this year. AT&T has come back and said, well, the city of Ferndale is giving us till the end of the year to set up the new tower. And we're saying that's fine, but we're under order from the city of Ferndale to take our number down. So
So
we
that's
may,
it.
so what we need is we need a formal legal notice from the city that, you know, we can stay there on the site longer. But the problem is, if we have to demo that tower later in the year, the weather becomes a factor. We don't want to be taking a tower down in October and November when we're into the rainy season. So, you know, it's stay tuned on this one, but our intent is we don't receive notice from the city that would allow us, you know, conceivably to keep the tower there until next year if AT&T isn't done with their work until late this year. You know, we'll be giving AT&T a notice to vacate. You know, we're kind of caught in a bind on this one. So more to come. I'm sure we'll have conversation with the city and AT&T further. Last thing, Chris has already touched on this, water treatment plant 1, but that continues to be a high focus for operations staff, is analyzing the options for rebuilding the plant and costs, and then moving forward. So we will be having discussions with the customers coming up real soon. We're just trying to pin down some more cost information first. And with that, I'll stop, see if there's any questions.
No questions from me.
No,
Thank you, Brian.
thanks.
I will say with this whole city of Ferndale tower thing, we have the makings of a really classic Saturday Night Live skit.
No
here.
kidding.
I was gonna say it's like out of a Parks and Rec.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Parks and Rec,
yeah.
my favorite. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
We will move on to commissioner reports. I will ask that we keep this as brief as possible because we have a 90-minute executive session that we're headed into.
So I'll be really short. I've
Okay.
just been working with Chris
Okay,
and
we'll go.
Nooksack preparing this event for Friday.
Yeah.
That's mostly what's been on
That's
my radar,
exciting.
and some legislative texting and some back and forth. That's always exciting, you know,
Yeah.
but that's it for me.
Okay. No
Yeah.
per diem request.
Well, just the thing on Friday.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the lunch. But I think that's it for me, other than stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
So. There's a city club tomorrow on the boat decision.
Oh.
I'm gonna go either way. It doesn't really matter. Whether I'm gonna follow as a per diem, but if you think it's worthwhile, I'll report back. So any thoughts on that?
I think it's useful for us to continue gaining knowledge on that. What do you think, Commissioner Arnett?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not passionate either
Okay.
way. I've been growing up with the bolt decision being a very active part in my life in fishing.
So, you know, I've got another thing the next day. I'll just follow on. Per diem. Yeah, I got some non-net meetings the next day. Those are probably like 50 as well. I'll just do tomorrow for my per diem. And then of course PPC will be in early March. So I'll be attending that, but that's already listed on mine.
Yeah.
So, just quick comments then, because we are tight on timing. First thing is that, I attended, one of the steering team meetings, the county executive asked me to attend, and, I am continue to be interested in this issue. Of where does wireless dovetail into, fiber? I think, repeating again, where I'm at as a commissioner, I really embraced our original policy positions in 2019. Which were focused on trying to do what we could to build the infrastructure and support actually mid-mile, even though the funding doesn't actually pay for mid-mile and fiber. So that's the same, but I am curious about ways that we can use wireless to penetrate deeper into the underserved. And I don't define personally a tool's definition of underserved is not the state broadband office's definition of underserved, and we can talk about that in our next retreat again. That's on telecom, and then on the energy front, I've been having some conversations with folks like Marcus Ventura about virtual net metering. From that's all my own education, by the way. I'm not expecting anything support from the PUD in that area, but the also related things are some options with that are coming in conversations at PPC and with BPA. Specifically, see if they're what can PUDs do to encourage BPA to support new sources. And in closing, my last comment about that I want to make is something I want to leave you both with is as PUDs, sometimes we present conflicting priorities to Bonneville. On the one side, we say we want very short contracts. We don't want to make any commitments. Yet we want them to think long-term. Look, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that, well, if you're not going to make any longer-term commitments, how can you expect your supplier to think long-term? So anyway, there's a lot of things that the public power community does that hamstrings BPA and perhaps Energy Northwest as well. And it's important to realize when you're asking for things that have conflicting impacts. Not to say you don't ask it anymore, but just recognize that you're setting up a difficult situation. So anyway, that's just my report.
Thank you. I don't have any upcoming per diem requests, and the while we're one board, the meeting was canceled, so we won't be doing that this week. When at the WAPUDA meetings, I was able to touch base with all of the legislators in the 42nd and Alex Rammel in the 40th. And we mostly discussed geothermal. One thing that came up from Alex, from Representative Rammel, was a support letter for the CCA. And I think that we should do that. And I'm also wondering, between now and November, what we can do to ensure that our funding mechanism for geothermal isn't repealed, and what our role is in that.
I think that is could we put that on the agenda for the next meeting
do
under
that.
new business? Because I think
Yeah,
that,
actually, I
or old-
owed Jamie a draft on that. We
Okay,
talked about that and I
okay.
haven't done it yet.
Yeah, I'm wholeheartedly in support.
I think that's
Yeah.
a really good, thank you
Yeah.
for.
Okay, so we'll put that on the agenda
Okay.
then for the next meeting to discuss. And that is, I did want to bring up one other thing though. There was at WAPUDA, there was a really great, like an educational presentation from, I think it was Evergreen. They do a water wastewater apprenticeship program, and I was wondering if we ever took advantage of that here.
I'll have to check. We use WAPUDA and AWWA and other associations for training. We don't do internal training. We shop it out.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Brian, can I ask you to follow up next meeting, just give an overview of what our typical training is, because we get our guys off the street and we bring them up to operator level, and that's
Sure.
a certification, state
yeah.
certification. So we've got a whole system we go through.
Yeah, okay. It sounds like there's funding available though, like they pay part of that salary. which is
That's a
really
good
great.
point,
Yeah.
Also, I just forgot one per diem request. It's to meet with some of the transmission folks from BPA. When I was at Energy Northwest at the end of January, we got a presentation from Richard Sheenan, I think it's like, who's like in charge of transmission for BPA, and I had a good conversation with him afterwards, and he's like, you know, transmission is, I mean, it's his thing, He's like, it could kill your project. From the very beginning, you gotta think about this as soon as
Yeah.
possible, and I said, okay, is there anything we should be thinking about? And he's like, well, just follow up with me. So we're following up with someone from his team. And I think it's, for me, it's just really, I
Yeah.
wanna, and Chris knows a lot about this, but I just think that as a commissioner, I wanna understand more about what this transmission variable looks like when you're doing a generation project, because the source, the resource could be there, but if we can't get it out, then
And the other
No.
part of it is timing.
timing, yeah,
So-
oh, the weight
Yeah,
is
and-
crazy right now.
And clearly, when you have one of these projects, whether it's a, solar, wind, geothermal, anything, hydro, where you've got to connect it, you have to run the interconnection process parallel to the actual project development process. If you don't, then you're going to add another 5 to 7 years on the tail end of the project, and the project likely will die. And when you read this book, there's an interesting chapter in there on how it's important on these big projects to close the window of opportunity very quickly. And there's an example of where you want to run processes in parallel, because project that's open 15 years, like a typical geothermal is, without regard to transmission, there's plenty of opportunity for mischief there. If you add another 10 years on the end of that, and make it a 25-year project, you can almost guarantee that somebody's going to intervene and shut it down, even though it's a good project from every perspective.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
and clearly Brian and I know about the interconnection process. It's part of what we're doing with the 230 kV and, all the other stuff, but it would probably be good for you guys to know more about it.
Mhm, mhm.
So when your focus on that transmission meeting will be specifically on Mount Baker, or will it be more than that?
This conversation we're having, I requested a meeting specifically to talk about this project in the context of some of this feasibility work that's ahead of us over the next few years. Where, I mean, really, we're looking at a go, no-go decision. There's sort of this feeling of, oh, this project's gonna happen, and I keep being like, there's a good chance it won't happen, because there's so many things that the stars need to align on, including transmission.
So-
And that's one of the things that I want to understand
So
more
just a
about.
real quick on the process. We're at the point of pre-feasibility, which is where you say, you look at the site and you say, what data do you need to extract from that site to figure out whether or not you've got a project? And then you go and drill some holes, and then that goes into your feasibility study. One of the outputs of the feasibility study is the likely size of the plant. Once you have the likely size of the plant, that's the minute you get a hold of Bono. And until then, you got nothing to talk to them about other than, hey, we have a project here. And they'll say, how big is it? When will it come online? Well, we don't. And they'll go, well, get back to us when you know. And that's how it works.
Okay, I'm gonna finish my commissioner report, so then we can get into the executive session. On the other end of what you're saying, though, I had some conversations, and Chris has had some conversations with a local geologist, actually 2 of them, I think.
Well, the second one hasn't got back to me.
Okay, yeah, about whether they believe there even is a
Mhm,
target in
mhm.
those areas. So there's a lot of things that are still, big question marks.
For sure.
And that is it for me. So you're going to move on to public comment.
If I may, Chair, you said about the watershed management, I just want to let you know, I had meetings with county council members last week to give them an update on where we are with geothermal, for example, as well as water, as well as broadband. But one thing that came up with Councilmember Donovan and Buchanan was they're working to improve the process for how the EDI board is constituted and meets. And I took a little bit of liberty. I want you to know that, because I'm not our watershed management board representative. But having been in the past, I thought it'd be appropriate to say that the PUD is also curious about the watershed management board and why it meets so infrequently. So I want to
And we
make sure you're
canceled
okay with what I
quite a
said.
bit, yeah.
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 And then we'd like to,
All the time.
yeah, and we'd like to, and we'd have the process be more council, I mean, less executive driven and kind of ad hoc
Yeah.
than it has been. So I just want to make sure you knew.
That's great. Yeah, I've brought that up in a meeting here before, that it's, we only have them it's every other month they're scheduled.
Yeah, there's
and
6 a year.
Yeah, and they're canceled quite frequently, so.
And we usually make 4 a year. If you go back, that's kind of the historic average.
Okay, moving into public comment. Rick.
Actually, I have a couple quick one regarding Commissioner Desmond's comment about the recent voltage sag. I hope nobody is surprised as we continue to get rid of dispatchable power generation and force feed the grid with variable power generation. We can expect situations like this to become far more common as we go forward. It's something that everybody needs to be aware of and be ready to deal with. The second thing, Chris mentioned that somebody who lives on a road and there's internet cable out in front of their house, but they elect not to hook up to it, should not be considered underserved or unserved. That means that in Whatcom County, there are essentially no underserved or unserved people because Starlink is available throughout the county currently. And if anybody wants to know about experience with that, I personally recently switched from DSL to Starlink. So if you're interested, I can tell you what that looks like.
Thanks, Rick. Any other comments? I don't see any hands raised. We will be moving to an executive session to review the qualifications and or performance of a public employee and to discuss potential litigation. John, do you think that's going to take 90 minutes or should we say an hour?
I think we should I would say, 45 minutes. And if we need to extend it, we need to extend it. And if you want a break, let me know how long. I mean, we could say we'll be back at 10:30. That's 40 minutes if you take a break for 8 minutes.
Okay, so we will be back at 10:30.
Well, yeah, we'll go to executive session at 9:50. So you have an 8-minute break and then we'll be
Okay.
coming out.
No,
at
I think a
10:30,
couple
and if
minutes
not,
is
Yeah,
we'll-
we should take a minute break.
Yeah, we can start in a couple of
Okay.
minutes.
I don't.
Okay.
Okay, all right, very good. And then
Yeah, 8 minutes. It's like
we'll come out
Okay.
at 10:30 and if we need an extension, I'll text Dan.
Great, thank you, John. Okay.
I'll see you on the other side.
Okay, we are back into regular session. No action was taken in the executive session and we are adjourned. 10:31.
Woo, good
Thank you.
job, everybody.
And I know you had a hard stop at 11. I do too.